Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Matt Chat. It's my pleasure today to be joined by my longtime friend, formerly the best hair in wrestling, and now the worst ears in Hollywood, Mr. Couture. I always got to try to find a good one for you, boss. How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, I no longer have that hair.
I
We have the
saw
same, actually.
somebody posted a throwback match. I think it was actually Beat the Street Chicago with the match with you and Mike Foy, and from a long time ago.
Yeah.
It was a great match, but just the hair was epic, man. It was.
Yeah, I think that was 1991 in North Idaho at the big Unidome there in not Idaho, Iowa.
Northern Iowa, yeah. Yeah.
Northern Iowa, yes.
Yeah.
Him and I had, I think over the course of our careers, we wrestled each other, I think 14 times.
Oh my God, really? That many times?
Yeah. So there was a little rivalry there.
Well, especially in Greco, there's a limited amount you can do. After a while, you're just trying to snap the guy's head as hard as you can, it feels like. So before we get into all the wrestling and fighting stuff, update everybody on your health, man. I got crushed with text and emails, and I passed those on to you, but the story was out there, but I kind of want everybody to know what's going on and what happened.
Yeah, well, the health is fine. The health is good. I've always had thick blood, polycythemia. My iron levels and my blood are right up at the top of normal. For whatever reason, either dehydration or they hopped up over normal. I had a plaque rupture in one of my arteries in the middle of a workout. Tried to roll it out with the foam roller, didn't work. Walked over to the emergency room and they hooked me up to the EKG and realized I was having a heart attack. Basically, that my thick blood created a clot in that artery to close the plaque rupture, and so they had to go in, suck out the clot, put in a stent. So yeah, I bruise a little easier now. I'm going to be on a thinner for probably forever, but who knows? But the health is good. I have to stay on top of giving blood once a month, every 8 weeks at the most, to keep my blood down in the normal range. Unfortunately, I can't just go to a blood bank because I served in Germany in the 80s and may have been exposed to mad cow. So blood banks won't take my blood. I have to go through a phlebotomist, a doctor, to draw my blood and throw it away. Blood banks don't do that. So thankfully it happened when and where it happened. I was in LA. I lived 3 blocks from Cedars-Sinai, which is an amazing medical facility there, and was able to walk over to the emergency room and get taken care of. And they took great care of me. And I feel great, training, working out, everything's going well. And it wasn't a lifestyle issue. It's a genetic issue. And I just have to stay on top of it.
But I mean, so people understand you literally didn't feel well, and just literally walked yourself into the emergency room?
Yeah, I felt, you know what? It felt like I had popped a rib. I was working out, normal workout up at Unbreakable in LA. And I felt like crap. And I'm like, man, I just worked out 3 days ago. I wasn't out that long.
Right.
I sweating and I drank a recovery drink after workout and immediately threw it up, which I knew was a red flag for me because I've never been a puker ever. Yeah. So we went home. I drove home, which is, a couple mile drive down the hill to the condo. And the ache wouldn't go away. It was a weird kind of, I felt like I popped a rib, but it was duller than that.
Yeah.
Wouldn't go away. I tried to lay down and just relax, figuring I'd overdone it, and it just wouldn't go away. So I knew something was wrong and walked over to the emergency room. And of course, they were freaking out as soon as they put me on the EKG. All hell broke loose. The clothes start being ripped off, and I'm being carted up to a
the paddles out.
Yeah. I'm sure these eyes were huge. She thought they were going to cut my chest open and that I was having that kind of heart attack. So it was pretty crazy.
Well, there's a lot of stuff, obviously right now there's not a lot of live events happening, but one of the things that came back first was, really the first thing was the UFC. Somebody tried to argue with me the WWE, which is kind of ridiculous. That's a sport, but that, the UFC was the first sport to go live. Obviously, most people know you from that. A lot of us know you from wrestling and then obviously the acting world, but the UFC. And I know you and Dana White have had a various good, bad, ugly, restrained relationship over the years. And I know you're super active in the PFL, which had to shut down their whole season, but you're super active
Yeah.
in MMA still. So whether we talk about this specifically, the UFC or MMA as a whole, what are your thoughts about them going first?
Well, first of all, ONE FC did a show at the beginning of the quarantine in Asia with no crowd on closed circuit for all those spectators.
Okay.
That actually was done early on in the process, and it was back then that Dana was trying to throw a show, trying to do Fight Island and all those things back when this thing first broke out. At that time, we didn't have a lot of information. We were all buying the models that were being put out by who and everybody else, and obviously none of that has really panned out the way they said it was going to pan out. I disagreed with Dana trying to push and put a show on back then when we didn't really have the information and the numbers of what was going on with this virus at that time. I thought that was a bit careless, and I was kind of happy to see that ESPN stepped up and pulled the plug on that and said, look, we're not going to broadcast it. It's just too risky. So, and now I feel like he's done the right thing. We've seen now, we have real numbers. We have the models that have been cast aside, and we can really see what's going on here. And it's been way overblown, in my opinion. And so I'm glad that he stepped up and is now through Florida. Florida is one of the first states to open up, Florida and Texas. He's doing shows and getting us back to some form of normalcy. Great for those fighters. They got to work. They get paid. Obviously, a couple of those guys are, we had Nagano on that first card. We had Danny Inge and one of our female fighters that just fought on Saturday. Or are fighting this weekend. Actually, I can't remember. Oh, it's Monday. They just fought Saturday.
Yeah.
Right.
See,
do you have this problem during this quarantine? I forget what day it is. It's like they all start to feel the same.
Yeah.
You're locked in, and it's weird. But so the show Saturday, we had 2 fighters on that card. Obviously, the gym has been closed since it was mandated that we close. We had to keep it open for those 3 people coming in with their partners, keeping the tools sharp because they didn't know when they were going to actually get a date and get the call. I'm happy he did it when he did it, and that he's pushing that. And I think more of us, and you're seeing that across the board in every state, business owners and people who want to get back to normal, they want to go back to work, and they're pushing that. And they're pushing some of these governors. They're holding out and trying to drag this out. They're pushing them to open up, to get back to work, to get back to normal, get this economy fired up and rolling again. And I think that's important.
Yeah. You mentioned Francis Ngannou. So he was training with you guys, because that guy's a monster.
Oh, he's huge. He's an amazingly good athlete, very explosive, great big guy. He's been working on his ground game and his wrestling. I mean, that's how he lost the Miocic fight, was Miocic took him down and smothered him. So he's been trying to find those tools and put those tools in his tool belt to deal with that, because he's going to be tough to stand in front of for anybody. He's got amazing power.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I was going to jump to, but this seemed like the right time now. So I was going to, like in wrestling a lot, they're like, well, would Dan Gable beat John Smith, would beat Cael Sanderson? Obviously, same weight classes, Jordan Burroughs, all these guys. My thought's always been people that found a way to be great would be great in any era, because the things that make you great are sort of transcendent of a generation. Like, it's the hard work, it's the dedication, it's commitment, stuff like that. You were always a guy that was masterful with game plans, and you and I have talked privately how MMA fights are probably a little easier to plan for than wrestling matches, because they're spaced out so much further apart. 12 weeks training camp video, all those things that you've kind of helped me become a better coach at by talking to you about it. So I'm curious, because, you have Ngannou in there. If you were fighting him, besides not getting hit with one of those lunch boxes, what's the game plan with a guy like that?
Well, I think you have to close the distance. You've got to get your hands on him, tie him up, try to take some gas out of that tank, and wear those arms down. And certainly pummeling and clinch fighting and cage fighting will do that. I think, like Miocic did, get him on the ground, try to float over him, smother him, stay out of those engagements where you're trading shots with a guy that's that explosive and that powerful. For sure.
He hits with the speed of like a 170, 185 pounder, it seems like. I mean, I don't know if there's a way to quantitatively measure that, but his hands are so fast for a guy that big. It's terrifying.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And that's something we did at the PFL with our smart cages. We put sensors in the wraps under the
Yeah.
gloves, and you can measure that punching speed, which if I'm Francis, I want to know what that feedback is. I want to know, is that a Camaro, a supercharged Camaro coming out my head?
Yeah. Yeah. He's frightening, man. Like, he seems like, in the limited clips I've seen, he seems like a really nice person for somebody who's as dangerous as he is. Was he like easy?
I found him to be very humble, very nice, got a very open mind. He wants to learn. He wants to be the best. He's great with kids. He's just a super nice guy. I've really enjoyed being around him. He's a great addition to the gym for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think most people know this, but you were the first guy to win the UFC championship at 2 different weight classes. And, it's happened since then, but obviously, it's awesome to be first because nobody can beat first. But, you see Henry.
I think BJ Penn did it before I did. I think he won it at 55 and 70 before I did it weight and heavyweight.
You're right. Yeah.
But, those are stats, and I'm certainly happy and honored to be a part of that group. That's an amazing group of guys that has pulled that off and done that. To see a guy like Henry Cejudo, Conor McGregor. I mean, some of these guys are doing it simultaneously, which is pretty remarkable. Something that a lot of us didn't do, but pretty cool group to be a part of.
Well, I was going to ask you about Henry because he took a really unique path through wrestling. I mean, went high school straight to the Olympic Training Center. If people have not watched that video of him back, like the documentary of him before he qualified for the Olympic team, it was crazy. Like, he was outworking all those guys at the Olympic Training Center and like killing them in these circuit workouts. And Kevin Jackson, marvels about him, but he didn't do folk style and he didn't do Greco. And folk style and Greco seem to be more transitional to MMA in terms of holding guys down and being in the clinch. He's worked with Eric Alberison, obviously with huge, rewards. Like, when you watch a guy like Henry, I don't want to say you've been blessed. You were so good that people seek you out as a coach. Obviously Henry already has a lot of tools, but like, if he came to you now, with a guy like that, what are you trying to tweak with him?
I don't think you have to tweak much with Henry, really. I mean, he has a total package. He's learned the striking part of it, and it's been very formidable there. Obviously, he has a strong wrestling, and he did wrestle folk style in high school, so he has that background there. He just didn't go to the collegiate level, and I think that's one of the styles that really translates well to fighting is folk style, because it's about controlling positions, holding a guy down, holding a guy in positions, using your legs and your body to kind of float over a guy and keep him on the mat. And I think all those things translate well to ground fighting when you can punch a guy in the head. I think Henry did a great job of that, and I think it would just be a function of tweaking some of those things that maybe came from that wrestling background and figuring out how to implement them more into his fight game, into fight situations. I mean, that was the game for me, Dan, Matt, all of us guys that had, Chael, all of us that had wrestling backgrounds. That was the fun. That was the game, trying to figure out these wrestling situations and how to implement them into fight circumstances. And it was a challenge, but it was fun and a lot of fun to do. And I think Henry's done a great job.
In that sense, MMA is like wrestling, right? Like, if you're a good upper body guy and I'm a good leg attacker, and we're wrestling a folk style or a freestyle match, if I can stay in space and get to your legs, my percentages go up. If you keep us touching and in clinches the whole time, obviously your percentages go up. MMA is just like, well, wrestling's now one piece of it. There's the striking, the jiu-jitsu.
Yep.
A lot of people call grappling, submission grappling, a form of wrestling. But, those three basic things, the submissions, the wrestling, and the striking, if you want to call it kickboxing or Muay Thai or whatever. But it feels like it's just a bigger Rubik's Cube. And where you can, it seems like, and I think this is the lesson that a lot of people maybe don't understand, and you've kind of talked to me about this, that when you can have the fight of the match where in your positions of strength, you can win even if the other guy's theoretically better at a lot of other stuff.
I agree with that assessment 100%. And I think you go out, formulate a game plan to try and put yourself in the best positions to win the fight. I felt like if I could go out and get past that striking, do it enough to protect myself and to be a threat there, but force a guy or make a guy where I could get my hands on him and make him wrestle me, I was in a better position to win those fights in those circumstances. I always felt like when I faced another wrestler, Kevin Randleman, Mark Coleman, guys that had a strong wrestling background, that kind of negated that strength in me. And now it was going to be a much tougher, much more interesting fight for me.
Yeah, that's you see that a lot now. And a lot of people are teaching guys at least like really good defensive wrestling, specifically for MMA, you know, like how to get up right away, you know, the fact that you can throw elbows instead of like, you know, normally like if you have your hands locked behind me, you know, like even when you go to the ground now you can't clasp, and folk style now you can clasp and knee and all and hook and all these other things, but the guy on bottom can throw elbows, and you know, going to your back's not the end of the world if you're a good BJJ guy. You know, you mentioned, but you see that a lot with these wrestling, like you're two stud wrestlers, it ends up being a striking match a lot of the time. You know, they're awesome wrestlers, they're not great submission guys. At least that seems to be the rule.
Yeah, well, and we've seen a few wrestlers come in that had uncommon power. Look at Henderson and the H-bomb, Johnny Hendricks. And in a lot of ways, they strayed away from relying on their wrestling to win fights. They went out and tried to punch guys in the head and use that power that they didn't. I don't think they knew they had that until they started fighting, honestly.
Sure.
So, you know, there were some guys. You know, Coleman wasn't. He was using his wrestling a lot. For most of his style was ground and pound and getting guys down, but he never really refined his striking or kind of learned a lot of the other things that I think would have made him a more well-rounded fighter. And then look at the success he had just with that strong wrestling background. So it's interesting. Everybody is individual. There is no hard, fast rule. There are plenty of guys that are exceptions. So
Yeah, there's a bunch of ways to get there, and that's what's cool about martial arts, mixed martial arts, and wrestling. Like, you know, you don't have to be just like a great double leg guy or a great counter guy, and obviously in MMA even more things. You know, you see some of the most dominant champs, and they had different styles. You know, so you mentioned Randleman, and when I was watching Fight Night Saturday, Randleman is going to be inducted, or I guess was announced he's in the Hall of Fame. It's different than the actual induction ceremony, but I guess he's officially now a Hall of Famer. And I know you went in, I think did you go in the initial class of the UFC?
I think I was the fourth person inducted.
Yeah.
I think Hoyce and Shamrock and one other person I think were inducted before I was, but
Right.
I'm not sure what the number is of inductees is now, but it's growing. And I certainly think Kevin should be inducted. He was a guy that was the champ, was an amazing competitor, fought anybody and everybody in the sport, and I'm really happy. Obviously, it's sad that he's not here to recognize that, but it's great for him and his family, his kids. That legacy lives on, and I think it's well deserved.
Yeah, and he was some of his close fights were in Pride, you know, which, you know, a lot of the younger people don't even necessarily know about Pride, but, you know, those huge crowds are like, you know, 80, 100,000 people in the ring, and you could soccer kick guys in the head, and, you know,
yeah.
Well, and they gave out like yellow cards and red cards if there wasn't enough action and stuff. I mean, it's a whole different thing, you know? So you said you fought Randleman?
I fought Randleman in the UFC back in the fall of 2000. That was under the old owners, Bob Meyerowitz and SEG. Dana White and the Fertittas didn't buy it till 2001, in February 2001. So literally just months before the ownership changed hands, I fought Kevin that fall, became the heavyweight champion again, and then a little bit like 5 months later, new owners and a whole new deal.
What was that guy always looked terrifying. Like I was telling a friend of mine, like there's some people that you're worried about losing, you're worried about getting hurt. Like that guy looked like he could hit if once he clipped somebody, he could hit you 20 times before the ref could jump in. You could literally be dead. Like, you know.
He was as explosive as they come. I got to watch him wrestle at Ohio State in college my junior and senior year. He was in the finals. He used to do that bounding thing right before his matches where he literally looked like he was going to jump out of the building.
Yeah.
He was as explosive as they come. He was fun to watch. He was an amazing athlete for sure.
Yeah. Well, he's sort of the precursor to the Dayton Fix roll and jump now, which
yes.
guy. So I don't know if he realizes that's a shout out to Randleman every time he does that.
I don't think he does that. I don't think he recognizes that either, probably.
Yeah. So, one of the things I'm working with people on right now is the future of wrestling and the economics of this with everything that's going on because of COVID, things being shut down, and is football going to be shut down? And if football is shut down, the trickle down to all non-revenue sports. And, it's kind of a broken model where one sport is funding an entire department. And because wrestling isn't more economically self-sufficient, it's going to be one of the sports that goes, like bowling cut their track program. Old Dominion did cut their wrestling program.
Yeah.
Certain other models like the NAIA model where, and that's, I don't need to get in the economics of it, but they're basically self-sufficient based on how they build things and how they basically space things out. So when you think about it, because obviously wrestling is a huge impact in all of our lives. I mean, I remember you telling me that if you had made the Olympic team or maybe won an Olympic medal, you probably wouldn't have fought.
I think there's truth in that. I think as things turned out, I was still hungry. I didn't achieve that goal. And then this new venue, a new place to go and compete showed up in that time and became my new purpose. As I realized I wasn't going to make another quadranium and make an Olympic team, this kind of filled that void and captured that competitive spirit that I had going into MMA. So I think that's true. I think if I'd have won my medal in 92 or 96, I would probably be a college wrestling coach somewhere right now. I would have never forayed into mixed martial arts, but things happen the way they're supposed to happen. I think we've been decimated since the 80s by Title IX, all the Olympic sports, men's gymnastics, men's swimming, a lot of men's sports got cut off the docket because rather than raise money to create women's sports in the name of Title IX and gender equity, they would cut men's sports to be in compliance. And I felt like we were just making some headway and bringing some wrestling programs back. And now this breaks out and certainly a lot of sports and a lot of brick and mortar stores and a whole bunch of things are in question right now with regard to how we move forward, how we get back to some semblance of normal. I'm hoping that, I know Old Dominion cut their program. I don't think that was COVID related. I think at some point we're going to get back to some semblance of normal and get back to being able to grapple, have contact sports, have sports in general. So I guess that we'll have to wait and see how that affects our sport of wrestling. But I feel like, especially with our female counterpart now and as many collegiate women's wrestling programs that there are across the country, I think that gives us a little bit of security. We need that female counterpart to kind of offset this balance and keep this balance and with Title IX and everything else that's going on. So it brings up some interesting questions, though. We're rolling into the summer here, and football is coming up. I just got the chance to speak to the Atlanta Falcons last week, and 26 new rookies coming onto the field. They can't have OTAs. They're not training.
Yeah.
And yet they're going to be expected here in the fall to get on a football field and be prepared physically and mentally to play the game.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting how all that plays out.
Yeah. And that's interesting, like the continuity. Like I love all sports they're talking about with the teams that have the least amount of turnover are probably going to have a head start, especially the first couple of weeks of the season. One of the things that ran through my mind when you said, you might have been a college wrestling coach instead of fight MMA. The cool thing about it is when you were done with wrestling, you were so young that you were right in the prime of your life when you started.
I feel like I was the underdog from day one just because of my age. I didn't start fighting till I was almost 34.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is. I made that work for me. It just being underestimated seemed to work. Being the underdog seemed to fit me just fine.
When you think about, like a lot of these other people that are talking about the future of collegiate wrestling, and it trickles down, right? If there's no collegiate wrestling, then maybe kids stop wrestling in high school, and then literally the whole sport becomes endangered. But one of the other things that people have been pushing for is possibly converting high school and college wrestling to freestyle. And I think one of the things that a couple things people are forgetting is one, well, what happens to Greco, right? And then the other part of it is if you're not doing folk style, one of the paths to make a living from wrestling is fighting. And you've touched on this, but how much folk style helps you in fighting. So, like if you were the czar of wrestling, how would you what would be your thoughts on how to handle some of this?
Well, I think you have to look at a bigger picture, and that folk style, collegiate style wrestling is our style of wrestling. There's no other country, there's no other place that wrestles that style. Why would we want to move away from that or do it? It's literally, we have presidents going all the way back that wrestled this style of wrestling. It grew out of catch-as-catch-can wrestling and became our collegiate wrestling and folk style wrestling. It'd be like doing away with sumo wrestling in Japan or schwingen in the Alpine countries of Europe. I mean, those are indigenous styles of wrestling that grew out of our society. I don't think we ever want to go away from that. That's a very elite group of people that won national championships at the NCAA level. Why would we want to curtail that? I don't think this virus or anything else should take us away from that style that we're grounded in, that is part of our society. And I look at it that way. And yeah, would it help our international styles to make all our scholastic kids do that in school? Maybe. But all those kids are doing that anyway at the schoolboy level all the way on up. They're wrestling Greco and freestyle. So taking a break for a couple of months in the winter to wrestle folk style is really not that big a detractor. Wrestling is wrestling at the end of the day. I don't think jiu-jitsu's that far off. It's wrestling inverted. I think it's a good way to be on the mat and keep yourself fresh and conditioned and still, make your brain work on how things, technically how to figure things out too. So I think wrestling is wrestling across the board, and I don't think we should do away with any of it or move away from any of it, and certainly not throw our American style of wrestling to the wayside for international results. Hell, we need to do some work in Greco. There's no doubt about that. We need to make that cooler. We need to make that more acceptable for our younger kids to start wrestling Greco, so that by the time they get on the international stage, they're not so far behind and they're not getting their butts kicked, and we're not winning medals at that level. And I think we need to change that mentality. But I think part of that is because USA Wrestling, like it or not, is a freestyle organization. I mean, that's the bottom line. But I want to see all the styles of wrestling, including grappling, because I think USA Wrestling is taking on grappling now. They're taking on some form of jiu-jitsu. So I think they all wash each other. One hand washes the other. I think they all take care of each other, and we need to build them all up, not push one to the side.
Yeah, I think one of Greco's problems, and it's not a problem they created, is like when you recruit a kid, you're recruiting them to win college matches, and the collegiate style's much more similar to freestyle, leg offense, leg defense, things like that, and, you'll see, like, if a kid wins Fargo and Greco, they're like, he takes third in freestyle, it's like big scholarship, that kind of thing. So, that's going to be a paradigm shift that's going to have to be made. I should tell people that a long time ago, I fought my first jiu-jitsu world championships, and I remember being super annoyed, and I was telling you about it one day. And I was practicing, and you're like, it's just upside down wrestling, dude. So
it is.
It was very dismissive, but also very helpful.
But it is. It's like inverted. You're allowed to lay on your back and operate from there, learn how to operate from there. In a lot of ways, it's wrestling inverted. A lot of the same mechanics, a lot of the same physiology all applies. It's just you're doing it from a lot different spot than we're used to doing it from.
Yeah, and it also makes more sense in a real fight, right? Like if somebody jumped you, you would turn and face them, right? Like you wouldn't work for hand control. Somebody jumps your back, or if you're teaching a martial art to a person, like if you're teaching it to your mom or your girlfriend or your wife or somebody like that, jiu-jitsu is really designed for the smaller person to be able to defend themselves against the bigger person.
Absolutely. Brazilian jiu-jitsu specifically, I think, was designed by a guy who was, Helio Gracie was a smaller competitor.
Right.
He was inordinately ended up on the bottom because he was smaller. These bigger guys kept getting him down. And so he fashioned a style that fit for a guy that was smaller and a size disadvantage. And I think that's why it is so important for women. I think it's a great self-defense model for women generally tend to get overpowered in those situations. God forbid you should ever have to use that, but boy, I sure like to have it in my tool belt if I did get attacked.
We won't tell that story, but I did see you put somebody in a triangle.
And I'm like, what am I doing here? How did this happen?
I literally walked by and you're like, sometime we'll tell that story another time. But yeah, it's also, you see a lot of law enforcement using jiu-jitsu and submissions, submissions in general, like a way to sort of disable somebody without striking, and where they're subject to lawsuits and things like that.
Absolutely. Use of force continuum. I've been training and working with law enforcement for over 20 years. I'm a reserve officer simply because of training hand to hand and working on those tactics. And I'll tell you what, wrestling applies a lot more to those situations than jiu-jitsu does. The last thing I want to do in an altercation on the street or like that is pull guard or be on my back.
Yeah.
Learn to take a guy down, control a guy, and hold a guy down with the various parts of my body and his body is wrestling. And that's definitely the thing you want to use in a lot of those situations where you don't know where the other threats are going to come from. And so being on the bottom is probably not a great idea, but learning how to take somebody down or knock somebody down and control them is certainly where you want to be.
Yeah. And, it saves a lot of lawsuits and, which saves us tax dollar money and stuff like that. Yeah. What's the schedule there in Nevada for when everything's opening back up?
Started opening in a phase one this last week, and I'm not sure. Our governor doesn't seem to have a real plan, to be honest, how these phases are going to unwind. But we're in the process of getting the gym back open here in a limited capacity. Obviously, we can't go right back to grappling, but a lot of our striking classes and our conditioning classes can go on in limited numbers with extra safety precautions for contact and stuff being taken and disinfecting being taken care of. So we're in the process of doing that, but a lot of the restaurants have spread their tables out and are creating more social distance, and some of them are opening and just doing takeout, but a lot of things are starting to open here in Vegas, not the casinos. And I'm wondering at what phase the casinos are going to be opening, because I know they're losing a ton of money every single day that they're closed.
Yeah, by the minute, I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. So, for you guys, like, you're still able to hold the, like you said, the conditioning classes and stuff like that. And I know you're doing stuff with MVP, right? Like I saw you guys did a super successful fundraiser.
Yeah, MVP, when this broke out and the lockdown orders became mandated, we started immediately, made the shift and pivoted to a virtual Zoom meetings with all our veterans. The worst thing we can do with these guys is isolate them. So we're literally just doing a half-hour video workout in their living rooms, wherever they're at, and then doing our huddle, our sit down and talk and communicate about this whole thing and whatever the struggles were. We actually had a lot more people show up for the Zoom meetings than we were getting to the actual physical meetings when the gyms were open. So, but we're excited with the momentum that we've gotten and the pivot, the shift to the Zoom meetings that we did. And we didn't lose any of our members over the course of this lockdown. So we're happy about that. And we want to keep that number at 0 for as long as we can. We're looking at opening in Dallas, our new chapter coming up in Dallas in short order. And that's what that fundraiser was all about. So trying to get Dallas.
So for people that don't know, I should, what is MVP? Describe it for people. What you guys
MVP is merging vets and players. The website is vetsandplayers.org. Through Jay Glazer and Nate Boyer. Nate was a Green Beret, he was a long snapper for Texas. He ended up getting a tryout with the Seahawks as a long snapper and made the team for a season. So he experienced wearing both of those uniforms. And we recognize through our work with Nate and a lot of our other pro ball players, as well as a lot of my work and Jay's work in the veteran communities, that they struggle with a lot of the same things. Transition after those uniforms come off to civilian world is very, very difficult for a lot of those guys. Our soldiers, all their infrastructure and everything they're used to relying on, that adrenaline and everything else that comes from the combat and the combat field, all gone. And same thing with our guys that walk out there in that uniform as a professional athlete. You strip that uniform away, they struggle with that transition. They're not normal humans, any of them, veteran or athlete. What percentage of the population gets to fight in the UFC at that level, or the NFL, the NBA, or any professional sport at that level? It's a very, very small percentage of our population that makes it to that level. They're not normal humans. So you can't just strip all that away and throw them back into the civilian world and expect that to assimilate very, very smoothly, to be honest. We all know the suicide rate for our veterans, but there's a suicide rate for professional retired athletes as well, and we want to turn those numbers back to zero if possible.
So the whole point of it is you've created this organization, and I know you and Jay Glazer are kind of the ones that started it, and so it's giving people camaraderie and chance to work out and kind of lost the team and talk to people that have gone through similar experiences, and almost like a buddy system, like, hey, if I'm feeling down, I can call you or something like that. Is that all part of it?
Exactly. Peer-on-peer counseling at a grassroots level. Most of these guys don't want some guy with a bow tie from Stanford telling them that they're broken or that they're somehow messed up and putting them on an antidepressant or an opioid to take care of their aches and pains and their depressing feelings. Give them a place where they could talk, let those demons out, share that stuff. But guys that speak that same language, that understand and are going through it too, or have been through it too, has been very, very powerful. And that's what MVPvetsandplayers.org is all about, is giving them a place, one, to train, because sweating and working out together breaks down a lot of barriers and creates a connection. Some of our best friends are the guys that we've trained with most of our lives.
Yeah.
So it creates this connection that's undeniable. And then you sit down, and many of them you just met that day, but somehow you feel connected to them, and you're okay to say, yeah, man, my wife's leaving me and blah, 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 whatever it is. Let it out and share and talk about it. And some other guy across the room may have gone through that experience, and now he can say, you know what helped me, man, and how I look at this. And now all of a sudden you start to develop some tools to deal with that crap and stay positive and choose to go in a much more positive direction moving forward.
Yeah, it's an awesome idea. And I think there's everything you said, obviously I agree with, but the part where you said, like, they're not normal people, like they're not even 1%ers, like it's a fraction of 1%.
Absolutely.
To do these things. And part of it too is you're treated uniquely, like you're treated special. You don't have to wait in line. You get free stuff. Like I always joke, like probably when you were coming up and didn't have any money, nobody buy you a drink. Now that you got a few bucks, nobody will charge you for a drink.
Making me a guest bartender. I mean, what kind of thought process went into that decision?
But helping these guys literally be like, I know what you're going through, and like you said, not the person sitting in the leather chair that's never experienced and never even pushed themselves to try it. Like I was explaining to somebody the other day, wrestlers, and I'm sure fighters are the same way. I just didn't fight, but wrestlers respect wrestlers if they're honest more than people that didn't wrestle, even if the person that wrestled was terrible, like because it's just hard. And
yeah, no, it's an instant connection. I don't care who you are, where you came from. If you were JV, it didn't matter. You wrestled. If that comes up in the conversation with anybody, oh yeah, I wrestled so and so. Oh, okay. Immediately we're connected, and we know we've been in those practices. We've experienced those coaches. We've been through that stuff, and that there's an immediate connection there.
Well, sometimes the worst wrestlers are the toughest guys because they're the ones that got the crap kicked out of them the most,
It's one of the things I love about the sport. It's not about the guy that was the champion or undefeated. The sport builds character at every single level, no matter what. If you turned out and you went through that process, that built that character, and that's going to carry you down the road if you keep looking through those wrestlers' eyes.
Yeah, for sure. So, and for people that don't know, you obviously also have your own foundation, Extreme Couture GI Foundation. We've done a bunch of events together and raised money, and that is usually for folks with amputations. I know you guys have been able to donate a lot of checks to Bethesda in Maryland, and I know you guys had a mutual friend of ours, Bam, had a big fundraiser scheduled for you guys where a couple years ago they killed it, and I'm sure it's probably either postponed or trying to figure your way around that.
Yeah, that one's coming up August 15th and is still on the schedule. We just had to postpone our 12th annual ride here in Las Vegas, which was supposed to happen May 9th. And we're obviously things are just now opening up. So to even have stops for a poker run, a motorcycle poker run, and all that stuff, it just had to be pushed back, unfortunately. So, yeah, that foundation, obviously I started, what's it been? 10 plus years ago now.
Yeah.
By gym staff and friends like you that have put on events and done stuff. We try to help those guys that are in transition that have been wounded in combat, not just struggling with TBI or PTSD, but have actually lost a limb or been wounded in combat. They're in the hospital sometimes up to 2 years in that process, in that transition, trying to get right, going through surgeries, learning to walk, bidding for prosthetics and all kinds of things like that. So that's been our focus. We're trying to expand that focus a little bit now and help some of these other guys that are in our local areas that struggle with their bills or struggling with PTSD and some of the other things, hooking them up with counselors, because we're through MVP and having 40 or 50 guys in this community that come to my gym every Friday. I've got a much better network in the veteran community here. So now those problems that arise where people need a little support financially, we can expand our mission a little bit and not just deal with the combat veteran that's stuck in the hospital on the East Coast or in San Antonio, but help those guys in these communities where these chapters for the foundation actually live and breathe.
Well, the very first event we did with you guys was when you basically shepherded somebody that wanted to run an event because her nephew had committed suicide from PTSD. And we ended up holding the event here, and you were gracious enough to come in for it. And, it was a thrill of a lifetime. It was an MMA event, which God forbid, those things are so expensive to run. That's why we're events now. But it was a super cool event, and it's very successful financially. And one of the things that family did was donate a bunch of money to like this foundation that puts these guys through, like, they learn computer skills. They do like equine therapy with horses. You do a lot of the buddy system, the peer-on-peer stuff. And the statistics showed like how many people don't commit suicide that go through that. And more or less, probably 25 families never lost somebody that probably would have if it wasn't for that event. So it's really meaningful in a different way. And it's like those unseen, I think you used the phrase unseen scars,
Not all our scars are visible. They're not all like these. Some of them you don't see, and sometimes those ones are the more painful ones that are harder to deal with.
Yeah, but it was, I encourage people. I've met a lot of really awesome people and in an awesome way from doing those events with you guys. And so I would encourage people to reach out. They can just go to xcgif.org and get a hold of Val and either support, just make a donation or a monthly donation or come to one of the events, and I'm sure they can find out about MVP there as well. Or what was the other website for MVP?
Vetsandplayers.org.
Yeah. So, obviously either one of those are awesome organizations. And, I think like you said, being able to help people locally where you can see, like you can literally see the difference, as opposed to going out once a year. Nothing wrong with either one, but it's nice to be able to, kind of be able to hug somebody that you saw made a difference in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's what it's all about, for sure. Trying to help others that need help others that gave so much to us, whether it be in the form of entertainment, walking on that field and sacrificing their bodies every Sunday, or walking out on that battlefield wearing that uniform and upholding this country and the Constitution that we're founded on.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to end things on a little bit of a lighter note. How's the copper mug collection?
It's holding. Yeah, and it's been put to good use for the last 8 weeks, for sure.
Yeah, mine too. I saw you stand up for a second. I think we might actually be wearing.
We are. I got the tank top version.
I would ask that nobody call in and vote on who filled it out better. I humbly submit, take second place.
You got the orange and black going though. You got the cowboy colors going.
That's what the guy gave me. So, I won whatever color he sent me. Well, I'll be out there in August. So hopefully by then everything's cleared up and maybe we can grab a steak and a mule and catch up on everything.
Absolutely.
I'm glad your health is good, man.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm healthy as a horse. Feel great. Been grappling and getting on the mats and doing some light sparring. Doesn't make sense to do any hard sparring. And no, I didn't spar with Francis. I did a little wrestling with him, trying to teach him some things on the mat with a bunch of the guys that were in what he was getting ready for this last fight. Obviously, in 20 seconds, he didn't need it, but it was fun to work with.
Anything else for us before we wrap it up?
No, I think we're great, man. I appreciate you.
Really appreciate you coming on, and
Pleasure.
And good luck to Mindy. I know she's got a
Thanks.
thing coming up here in the next couple of weeks. Please give her our best. And
We'll do.
A loss recently too, so please, prayers.
Yeah, we'll do, bud. Thanks.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was the great Randy Couture. We'll speak to y'all next week.